In October of 1889, in the industrial heart of Manchester, England, something occurred within the walls of the Barrow family estate that would challenge the very boundaries between life and death. The Barrows had built their fortune through 3 generations of textile manufacturing, their mills employing half of Manchester's working class. But it was the birth of identical twins, Sarah and Emma, in 1871 that would mark the beginning of events so disturbing that the family physician, Dr. Edmund Hayes, would seal his medical records for nearly a century. From their first breath, the twins exhibited an uncanny synchronicity that transcended mere genetic similarity. They finished each other's sentences, fell ill with matching symptoms despite only one being exposed to contagion, and most unnervingly, seemed to share physical sensations across distances that should have made such connection impossible. But before we dive into this nightmare, if you're new here and love spine-chilling stories, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to be notified when the next one drops. Now, let's begin. September 1889 brought an unseasonably cold autumn to Manchester, and with it came the scarlet fever outbreak that would claim 17 lives in the textile district alone. But what happened to Sarah Barrow would prove far more disturbing than a simple case of contagion. The fever struck Sarah on September 15th, beginning with the characteristic strawberry red rash spreading across her throat. Yet within hours of Sarah's diagnosis, Emma, who had been visiting their aunt's estate 30 miles away in Liverpool, began exhibiting identical symptoms: the same pattern of rash, the same burning fever, the same delirium-induced utterances, despite having no exposure to the disease whatsoever. The Barrow family, possessing considerable wealth and influence, summoned the finest physicians in northern England, including Dr. Hayes and a specialist from London's Royal College of Physicians, Dr. Archibald Pemberton, who would later document that Emma's symptoms were medically impossible, as repeated examinations confirmed she had no bacterial infection, no swollen glands, no genuine scarlet fever, yet her body mimicked Sarah's deterioration with terrifying precision. The family quarantined Sarah in the east wing of their Georgian mansion, while Emma was kept in the west wing under constant medical observation. But the separation seemed to intensify rather than diminish their mysterious connection. When Sarah's fever spiked at precisely 2:15 a.m. on September 28th, reaching 104.3 degrees, Emma's temperature rose to exactly the same reading at exactly the same moment, despite being monitored in a room maintained at a steady 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Dr. Hayes's medical notes, discovered in 1987, describe his growing unease as he documented phenomena that defied every principle of medical science he had spent decades studying. When Sarah's breathing became labored on October 1st, Emma began gasping in perfect synchronization. When Sarah's heartbeat grew erratic, Emma's pulse matched it, beat for beat. When delirium took Sarah, and she began speaking in what the nurses described as ancient tongues, Emma, still physically healthier, began reciting the same incomprehensible phrases, word for word. The night of October 2nd brought a brief hope when Sarah's fever broke, her skin cooling, her breathing steadying, and simultaneously, Emma sat up in her bed, fully lucid for the first time in days, announcing to her nurse, "She's leaving me behind." But this respite lasted mere hours before Sarah's condition catastrophically deteriorated, her body convulsing as toxins overwhelmed her system, and at exactly 3:47 a.m. on October 3rd, 1889, Sarah Barrow's heart stopped beating. At that precise instant, 37 witnesses across 2 wings of the mansion watched as Emma, who had been sitting upright moments before, collapsed backward onto her bed, her body going rigid, her eyes rolling back, and most disturbing of all, her breathing ceased for exactly 4 minutes and 13 seconds, the same duration Dr. Hayes had fought unsuccessfully to revive Sarah, before Emma suddenly gasped, back to consciousness, tears streaming down her face as she whispered words that would haunt everyone present. "She's not gone. She's inside me now." The morning of October 4th, 1889, began with what the household staff would later describe as an unnatural stillness that settled over the Barrow estate, broken only when Emma emerged from her room at precisely 7:23 a.m., the exact time Sarah's body was being prepared for burial in the estate's private chapel, a detail Emma should have had no knowledge of, as the family had deliberately kept all funeral arrangements from her in her fragile state. Yet Emma walked directly to the breakfast room, where her parents sat in mourning, and announced with disturbing clarity, "Sarah says you've chosen the blue silk dress with Mother's pearl buttons, but she wants the cream one she wore to Cousin Margaret's wedding, and she insists you must not use the lilac powder. She says it makes her sneeze even now." Mrs. Barrow fainted upon hearing this, as she had just minutes before privately instructed the undertaker's assistant to dress Sarah in that exact blue dress, had personally selected her own pearl buttons to be sewn onto it that very morning, and most unnervingly, had specifically requested lilac-scented powder to mask the growing smell of death. Dr. Hayes, who had remained at the estate to monitor Emma's condition, immediately began documenting what he would term impossible knowledge episodes, noting that Emma demonstrated awareness of minute details occurring in rooms she had never entered. She knew that the undertaker had accidentally torn Sarah's stocking and had replaced it with one from Emma's own wardrobe. She knew that a single white rose had fallen from the funeral arrangement. At exactly 9:15 a.m., she knew that her father had slipped Sarah's favorite childhood toy, a small porcelain rabbit, into the coffin when he thought no one was watching. The physician attempted to rationalize these revelations, initially theorizing that servants might be secretly informing Emma. But his investigation revealed that Emma knew details that no single person could have known. She described conversations held in whispers between the undertaker and his assistant in the chapel cellar. She recited word for word a Latin prayer Father Morrison had spoken alone over Sarah's body at dawn, and most impossibly, she accurately described the pattern of rain on the chapel's stained glass windows during preparations, despite her room's windows facing the opposite direction entirely. Dr. Hayes's journal from that day reveals his growing distress. Miss Emma speaks of her sister not as deceased, but as actively present, claiming Sarah stands beside her, whispering constantly, showing her through Sarah's eyes what transpires around her earthly remains. Medical science offers no explanation for knowledge acquired through impossible means. The family, desperate for rational explanation, summoned Dr. Pemberton, again from London, who spent 3 hours examining Emma before declaring her symptoms consistent with hysteric grief delusion, prescribing laudanum and bed rest, dismissing the uncanny accuracy of her statements as coincidence amplified by sorrow. Yet even he could not explain how Emma had known about the birthmark on Sarah's shoulder blade that the undertaker had discovered, a mark that had been hidden since childhood and unknown even to their mother, leading Dr. Hayes to write his first truly fearful notation. Either madness has taken her completely, or something beyond medical understanding is occurring within these walls. On the evening of October 8, 1889, 5 days after Sarah's death, the Barrow household witnessed the beginning of a phenomenon that would transform skepticism into terror, when Emma, sitting at the writing desk in the library, suddenly seized a fountain pen and began writing rapidly in perfect mirror script, her left hand moving across the page from right to left despite being naturally right-handed, producing text that could only be read when held up to a looking glass. The family initially dismissed this as another manifestation of Emma's grief, until their governess, Miss Catherine Whitfield, held the first page to the mirror and read aloud words that made Mrs. Barrow collapse. September 3rd, 1889. Mother doesn't know about Frederick yet. How he kissed me behind the garden maze. How I promised to keep it secret until Christmas when he plans to speak to Father. A secret Sarah had indeed kept, as the family would later confirm when they found a love letter from Frederick Ashworth, the banker's son, hidden in Sarah's music box, dated exactly September 3rd. Dr. Hayes was summoned immediately and observed Emma for 4 consecutive hours as she filled 27 pages with backwards text, her eyes vacant and unfocused, her left hand moving with supernatural speed and precision, while her right hand lay completely limp. And most disturbing of all, the handwriting perfectly matched Sarah's distinctive loops and flourishes, despite Emma having always possessed a notably different writing style characterized by sharp, angular letters. The physician attempted to interrupt the writing several times, but Emma's hand continued moving even when he tried to restrain it, and when he removed the pen, her fingers continued the motions in the air until another writing implement was provided, leading him to document. The patient appears to be merely a vessel through which these communications flow. She shows no conscious awareness of the act. The true horror emerged when the family, on Dr. Hayes's suggestion, retrieved Sarah's private diary from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard in her room, a location Emma swore she had never known about, and compared the mirror writings to Sarah's actual entries, discovering that Emma was reproducing, word for word, diary passages Sarah had written in the weeks before her illness, including entries about private thoughts she had never shared with anyone, her fear of the recurring nightmare about drowning in black water, her suspicion that the housemaid Mary had stolen her cameo brooch, and most chillingly, an entry from September 14th, one day before the fever struck, where Sarah had written, "I feel death approaching like a cold hand on my shoulder, but I am not afraid. Emma and I are 2 halves of one soul, and not even death can truly separate what God has joined in the womb." The mirror writing continued for 6 more days, producing over 200 pages that chronicled not only Sarah's documented past, but began to include entries dated after her death, describing her own funeral from the perspective of someone watching from above, naming mourners. Emma couldn't have known attended, describing the rain that began exactly as the coffin was lowered, and ending with a message that caused Dr. Hayes to consider removing Emma from the family home. "I am learning to use her hands. Soon I will use her voice. And then, dear family, you will understand that death is merely a doorway I hold open." By October 15th, 1889, the Barrow family's desperate search for answers led them to contact Professor Marcus Whitmore of the London Society for Psychical Research, a man whose investigations into spiritualist phenomena had earned him both acclaim from believers and scrutiny from the scientific establishment, and who arrived at the Manchester estate with an arsenal of equipment designed to document and verify supernatural occurrences under controlled conditions. Professor Whitmore established what he called a scientific séance chamber in the estate's drawing room, installing multiple gas lamps at measured distances to prevent shadow manipulation, placing thermometers at 12 different points to detect temperature variations, and most importantly, positioning 6 independent witnesses, including Dr. Hayes, 2 magistrates, a Presbyterian minister who attended as a skeptic, and a stenographer to record every word. Around Emma in a perfect circle, each observer tasked with documenting specific aspects of what would unfold. At precisely 8:00 p.m. on October 17th, with Emma seated in a straight-backed chair in the center of the room, her wrists loosely bound with silk ribbons to prevent unconscious gestures that might be mistaken for supernatural manifestation. Professor Whitmore began his formal documentation, noting that Emma's baseline temperature registered at 98.1 degrees Fahrenheit, and the room temperature held steady at 64 degrees. Within 7 minutes of the session's commencement, the first transformation began. Emma's spine straightened unnaturally, her head tilting back at an angle that Dr. Hayes noted would typically cause severe muscular strain. Yet she showed no discomfort, and when she opened her mouth to speak, the voice that emerged was undeniably Sarah's, not Emma's imitation of her sister, but Sarah's exact pitch, her slight lisp on certain consonants, her characteristic way of emphasizing the third word in every sentence when excited. The stenographer's transcript records that Sarah began by addressing each witness by name, including Professor Whitmore, whom she had never met in life, accurately describing a birthmark on his left shoulder blade that he confirmed only his wife knew about, before turning to family secrets that made Mr. Barrow attempt to halt the session. "Father, shall I tell them about the child you fathered with the governess in 1867, the boy you've been sending money to in Leeds, calling him your ward?" A revelation that subsequent investigation would confirm as devastatingly accurate. The physical manifestations intensified as the session continued, with thermometers showing the temperature around Emma dropping to 41 degrees Fahrenheit, while the rest of the room remained unchanged, her breath becoming visible in the cold, despite the October evening being relatively mild. And most disturbing of all, witnesses observed what appeared to be 2 distinct shadows cast by Emma's body under the steady gas light, one matching her seated position, another standing beside her chair. Professor Whitmore's documentation includes sworn testimonies from all 6 witnesses describing how Emma's features seemed to shift and blur, occasionally appearing to be Sarah's face superimposed over her own, a phenomenon that the Presbyterian minister, Reverend Douglas Campbell, described as unholy and undeniable, leading him to abandon his skepticism and flee the room while reciting the Lord's Prayer, though not before he witnessed Emma speak in perfect Latin, a language neither twin had ever studied, reciting what was later identified as a 13th century burial rite, her voice dropping 3 octaves below her natural range, producing tones that Professor Whitmore's subsequent report declared physiologically impossible for any woman's vocal cords to achieve. On November 3rd, 1889, the Manchester Medical Society convened an extraordinary formal inquiry into what they termed the Barrow case, assembling 14 of Northern England's most distinguished physicians, including 3 members of the Royal College of Surgeons, to conduct the most rigorous scientific examination of alleged supernatural phenomena ever attempted in British medical history. The investigation committee, led by Sir William Grayson, Chief of Medicine at Manchester Royal Infirmary, established a clinical observation ward within the Barrow estate, transforming the morning room into what resembled a surgical theater, complete with leather restraints, glass observation panels, and the newest electrical monitoring equipment imported from Vienna, designed to measure minute variations in galvanic skin response. Over the course of 7 days, Emma was subjected to exhaustive examinations that would have broken a person in normal health, yet she endured procedures that included ice water immersion to test thermal responses, electrical stimulation of nerve endings to verify consciousness, and the administration of sodium pentothal, an experimental truth serum, all while maintaining her claims that Sarah was always present, watching through my eyes, furious at your disbelief. The documented phenomena during these medical observations defied every principle the physicians held sacred. When Dr. Harrison attempted to draw blood from Emma's left arm at 2:15 p.m. on November 5th, the needle penetrated normally, but the blood that emerged was several degrees colder than human blood should be while maintaining liquidity, registering at 61 degrees Fahrenheit compared to Emma's body temperature of 97 degrees, and most impossibly, when tested, it showed two distinct blood types mixed together, one matching Emma's known type, the other presumably Sarah's, though no sample of the deceased twins' blood existed for comparison. Sir William's personal notes, kept separate from the official record, describe his growing horror as Emma demonstrated medical knowledge she couldn't possess, correctly diagnosing an attending physician's hidden heart murmur by placing her hand on his chest and describing the exact location and nature of the valve defect, later confirmed by stethoscope examination, then accurately predicting that Dr. Morrison's wife, who appeared healthy, would miscarry within the week, a tragedy that occurred exactly 5 days later. The temperature anomalies became increasingly violent, with mercury thermometers literally cracking from rapid temperature shifts when placed near Emma, dropping from normal readings to below freezing in seconds, while Emma herself maintained stable vital signs despite frost actually forming on her skin during what she called Sarah's angry moments. The investigation reached its terrifying climax on November 9th, when during a routine neurological examination, Emma suddenly began speaking in the voices of other deceased patients the attending physicians had lost. 7 distinct voices in total, each reciting details of their final moments, their dying words, medical information from sealed records, causing Dr. James Pemberley to suffer what witnesses described as a complete nervous breakdown, screaming that the dead speak through her, before being sedated and removed from the estate. The Manchester Medical Society's official report, filed November 12, 1889, concluded with unprecedented language for a medical document. The phenomena observed exceed current medical explanation and suggest mechanisms beyond our present understanding of human physiology, though the addendum, sealed for 100 years, contained Sir William's true conclusion. What dwells within Emma Barrow is not merely her sister's spirit. Something older and more terrible has taken notice of these twins, using their connection as a doorway into our world. The phenomena that had initially centered on Emma Barrow began spreading throughout the estate like a malignant infection after November 15, 1889, when the Manchester photographer Harold Pemberton, hired to document the medical investigation, developed his photographic plates to discover that every image containing Emma also showed a translucent figure standing beside or behind her, a figure wearing the cream-colored dress Sarah had been buried in, her face sometimes clear and sometimes obscured by what appeared to be grave soil. The photographs, which survive in the Manchester Historical Archive, show this spectral presence becoming increasingly solid with each subsequent image, progressing from a mere suggestion of human form to a fully detailed apparition whose eyes, by the final photograph taken November 20th, appear to be staring directly at the camera with what witnesses described as conscious malevolence, and in one particularly disturbing image, Sarah's ghostly hand appears to be gripping Emma's throat, while Emma herself smiled serenely, unaware of the supernatural strangulation captured on film. The physical manifestations escalated beyond photographic evidence when on November 22nd, during a dinner attended by 12 witnesses, including the mayor of Manchester, every piece of cutlery on the table suddenly rose 3 feet into the air, hovering for exactly 13 seconds, the age difference in minutes between the twins' births, before clattering down in a pattern that spelled SARAHLIVES across the white tablecloth. Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, the housekeeper who had served the Barrow family for 30 years, documented in her private journal how she would arrive each morning to find furniture rearranged in Emma's room to exactly match Sarah's room layout before her death, including details like books ordered alphabetically by author rather than title, a preference unique to Sarah, and most unnervingly, fresh rose petals scattered on the pillow despite the November frost having killed all roses in the garden weeks earlier. The messages began appearing on November 25th, manifesting on any surface that collected condensation. Windows, mirrors, even the surface of hot soup, always in Sarah's distinctive handwriting, beginning with benign communications like "I miss you" and "Remember our birthday," but progressively becoming more disturbing. "The darkness here has teeth. Others want to come through. And most terrifyingly, Emma weakens, I strengthen." The household staff began experiencing phenomena independently of Emma's presence, with the stable boy Thomas Wright reporting that he heard Sarah's voice singing her favorite hymn in the empty chapel at midnight. The upstairs maid, Margaret Collins, finding her hair braided in the intricate pattern only Sarah knew how to create while she slept. And most dramatically, the butler, Mr. James Morrison, witnessing what he swore under oath was Sarah herself walking down the main staircase at 3:47 a.m., the exact time of her death, her burial dress leaving wet footprints, despite no rain having fallen for days. Dr. Hayes, maintaining his scientific observation, despite growing fear, noted that animals throughout the estate began displaying extreme agitation, with horses refusing to pass Emma's window, dogs howling at empty corners where witnesses later reported seeing Sarah's shadow, and most tellingly, a cage of canaries in the conservatory found dead one morning, arranged in a perfect circle with their tiny necks twisted at identical angles, beneath a mirror on which appeared the message, "They wouldn't sing her favorite song." December 24th, 1889, marked exactly 12 weeks since Sarah's death, and what occurred that Christmas Eve would force the Barrow family to flee their ancestral home forever, leaving behind only fragments of documentation that would remain sealed in the Manchester police archives until the building's demolition in 1987. The evening began with what servants described as an unnatural warmth, spreading through the house despite the winter storm raging outside. The temperature in Emma's room climbing to a stifling 94 degrees Fahrenheit, while frost formed on the inside of the windows, creating an impossible microclimate that caused the wallpaper to peel and curl like burning skin. At precisely 11:47 p.m., as the family gathered in the drawing room for their melancholy Christmas Eve prayers, Emma entered wearing Sarah's burial dress, which should have been 6 feet underground, her feet bare and bleeding from what appeared to be cuts from broken glass, though no glass was found, her eyes completely white, as if rolled back into her skull, yet she navigated the room with perfect precision. Mrs. Barrow's diary, recovered from the estate sale, describes how Emma's voice became a horrible harmony of both twins speaking in unison as she delivered prophecies that would prove devastatingly accurate. Father will die choking on his own blood before the spring roses bloom. Mr. Barrow would succumb to consumption on March 15th, 1890. Mother will follow when the summer heat breaks. Mrs. Barrow would die of heart failure on August 31st, 1890. Cousin Margaret's child will be born dead with the mark of twins upon it. Margaret would deliver stillborn conjoined twins in February 1890. But it was Sarah's final message, delivered through Emma's convulsing body as midnight approached, that revealed the terrible secret the family had hidden since the twins' birth. "Tell them, Mother, tell them what the midwife saw, what you paid her to forget, what Father had the priest bless away. We were not two when we emerged from your womb. We were one, joined at the spine, breathing through the same lungs, sharing the same heart, until the doctor cut us apart, and I got the smaller portion, the weaker half, destined to die while Emma lived with the strength meant for us both." Dr. Hayes's private notes confirm what the family had desperately concealed. The twins had been born as what medical science termed parasitic twins, with Sarah partially absorbed into Emma's body, surgically separated in a procedure that should have killed both infants. Yet miraculously, both had survived, though Sarah had remained frail throughout her 18 years of life. The revelation continued through Emma's possessed voice. "The cutting didn't separate us. It tore one soul into two bodies, and death has simply returned me to where I belonged, inside my other half, and now others have noticed the doorway our wound created, ancient things that wait in the darkness between life and death, and they want to crawl through." At the stroke of midnight, as church bells across Manchester rang in Christmas Day, Emma's body lifted 3 feet off the ground, suspended horizontally, and in a voice that witnesses said contained multitudes of the dead, she spoke her final coherent words. "We are becoming something new, neither living nor dead, and soon Emma will cease to exist entirely. There will only be us and then them, and then the door will never close again." January 1890 brought a deceptive quiet to the Barrow estate, as if the Christmas Eve revelation had exhausted whatever forces had been manifesting through Emma. But Dr. Hayes's daily medical examinations revealed a horrifying truth. Emma's body was beginning to display the exact progression of decomposition that Sarah's corpse would have experienced had it not been embalmed, despite Emma still being alive. Her skin developed what Dr. Hayes documented as patches of mortal lividity inconsistent with blood circulation, purple-gray blotches spreading across her back and limbs in the precise pattern that appears on corpses when blood pools after death. Yet Emma's heart continued beating, her lungs continued drawing breath, even as her flesh began to smell of formaldehyde and grave earth. The family, what remained of them after several members fled following Christmas Eve, maintained a constant vigil as Emma's consciousness flickered between moments of perfect lucidity and episodes of speaking as multiple entities, her voice sometimes that of a child, sometimes an old woman, occasionally speaking in languages that Professor Whitmore, called back for consultation, identified as pre-Christian Celtic dialects that hadn't been spoken for 1,000 years. Emma's final documented communication came on September 15, 1890, exactly 1 year after Sarah had contracted scarlet fever, when she requested paper and with hands that had begun showing signs of rigor mortis, despite her continued animation, wrote a letter addressed to those who will find this record. "I understand now what we were meant to be, why God or nature or random chance created us joined We were a bridge between worlds, and our separation was never meant to happen. The doctor who cut us apart didn't save 2 lives. He created a wound in reality itself that death has been seeping through ever since. Sarah tried to return to where she belonged, inside me, but something else came with her. Many somethings, attracted to the impossibility of our existence like moths to flame. I feel them crawling through my veins, ancient consciousnesses that predate human memory, using our severed connection as a gateway. My body is failing not from disease, but from containing too many souls, too many deaths, too many possibilities of existence that shouldn't be. By October 1st, 1890, Emma had stopped eating entirely, yet continued living, her weight dropping to 63 pounds, her body resembling a mummified corpse that somehow maintained animation. And most disturbing of all, witnesses reported seeing multiple shadows cast by her emaciated form, sometimes 3, sometimes 7, once counting as many as 13 distinct shadows moving independently of her movements. On October 3, 1890, at exactly 3:47 a.m., precisely 1 year after Sarah's death, Emma Barrow's heart finally stopped beating. But what the attending physician, Dr. Morrison, documented defied medical explanation. Her body continued moving for 47 minutes after cardiac arrest, her lips forming words no one could understand, her fingers drawing symbols in the air that Professor Whitmore frantically copied and later identified as cuneiform representations of doorway, eternal, and return, before she finally became still. The witnesses swore they could still hear her breathing for hours afterward, the sound coming not from her corpse, but from the walls of the room itself. In 1987, when the Manchester Police Headquarters underwent demolition, construction workers discovered a sealed vault containing Dr. Edmund Hayes's complete medical archives, including photographs, audio wax cylinder recordings, and over 3,000 pages of documentation about the Barrow twins that had been court-ordered sealed for 100 years, materials that modern forensic analysis would confirm as authentic and unaltered, with chemical dating placing the documents genuinely in the 1889 to 1890 period. Dr. Margaret Sheffield, of the University of Manchester's Parapsychology Department, subjected the photographic plates to spectrographic analysis, discovering that the apparitions of Sarah contained electromagnetic signatures impossible to fake with 1889 technology, patterns that suggested actual displacement of light particles by a physical presence, while the audio cylinders, when digitally enhanced, revealed subsonic frequencies beneath Emma's possessed vocalizations that formed words in reverse speech, creating a hidden dialogue that spoke of the wound between worlds that bleeds still. The investigation uncovered that the Barrow case was not unique, but part of a pattern spanning centuries. The Hayes archives contained correspondence with physicians across Europe, documenting 17 similar cases of twins where one died and allegedly possessed the survivor, including the 1743 Bavarian twins Marie and Catherine Engelhardt, the 1821 Russian nobles Alexander and Mikhail Volkonsky, and most remarkably, the 1456 Italian twins recorded in Vatican secret archives, all sharing identical characteristics, twins with unusual prenatal connections, one dying young, the survivor exhibiting impossible knowledge, and all cases ending with the survivor's death exactly 1 year after their twins' passing. The Barrow estate itself, abandoned since 1890 and now owned by the Manchester Historical Trust, has become a site of continued phenomena that modern equipment cannot explain. Infrared cameras consistently detect 2 heat signatures in the twins' former bedroom, when only one person is present. Electromagnetic field detectors spike to dangerous levels at exactly 3:47 a.m. each night, and most unsettling ground-penetrating radar has revealed that Sarah's grave, which should contain her remains, appears to be empty, while Emma's grave shows what technicians describe as impossible density readings suggesting multiple organic masses occupying the same space. Contemporary quantum physicists studying the Hayes documentation have proposed that the twins represented a natural quantum entanglement on a macroscopic scale, their surgical separation creating what Dr. Robert Haskins of Oxford termed a permanent rupture in local space-time coherence, essentially arguing that the Barrow twins were never truly 2 people, but one consciousness experiencing bifurcated existence. And their reconnection through death created a paradox that reality continues trying to resolve. The implications remain profoundly disturbing. If consciousness can survive bodily death through quantum entanglement, if surgical intervention can create permanent wounds in the fabric of reality itself, if the boundary between life and death is more permeable than we believed, then how many other possessed individuals throughout history were actually experiencing similar reconnections? And more terrifyingly, what ancient consciousnesses might have noticed these wounds in reality and found ways to exploit them, using the connection between twins as doorways into our world, waiting patiently for the next pair of quantum-entangled souls to be mistakenly severed, creating another breach through which things that should remain dead can crawl back into the light of the living.